Hi, I'm Terrell Turner, the host of the Business Talk Library, and today I have a great guest on. Now, as all of you know, my background is accounting and finance, so there is a part of me that I just have a love for accounting and finance, and I think that not only just the simply fact of just loving it for the sake of just me being my nerdy self at times, but the value that it adds to businesses. And one of the very big areas that a lot of businesses are trying to figure out is, as we live in this world of digital assets, how do we wrap our mind around it? How do we account for it? How do we even think about it from a valuation standpoint? And one of the people that is making great strides in really helping not only just, companies she's working with, but just an entire industry and companies all over start to get a grasp of that is Diana Krupica. So welcome to the show, Di.
Thanks so much for having me on your show. I love the opportunity to share what I do as well as spread the word about what the AICPA is developing.
Absolutely. Now, what I love is the fact that, like I said, we met through, our connection with the AICPA. And when I was talking to them about, hey, there are some great topics in accounting and finance that I think, businesses and the industries need to hear about. And they mentioned, like, we have some awesome AICPA experts in certain areas. And when your name came up and we started talking about digital assets, I'm like, yes, we need to get Di. Whatever we need to do, let's make that work. So now to get started, let's talk a little bit about, your background. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, and kind of what led you into, getting involved with digital assets?
Sure. So I started out with EY in the Manhattan office in the audit practice. And there I had the opportunity to work on a lot of different types of clients in the financial district, service industry, as well as not-for-profit. And it was late 2001 that I actually put in for a transfer out of New York City. And the first office that opened up and was available was North Carolina. So I wound up transferring with EY from New York City to Raleigh, North Carolina. And there I had the opportunity to work on so many different types of clients: manufacturing, biotech, pharmaceuticals, employee benefit plans, a whole bunch of different areas. And during this time, I did have 3 children, twin boys and a girl. And at the time they got to be 3, 3, and 1, pretty much nobody wanted to watch them because they were so spirited and they were a little bit energetic. And so I did make the decision to go ahead and become an at-home mom for 2 years. Toughest 2 years of my entire career. Hats off to any parents out there with 24/7, watching their kids. And I was very thankful at the end of the 2 years when my really dear friend at the AICPA called me up and said that there was a job in content development specific to employee benefit plans. And because I had been an employee benefit plan auditor, it just seemed like the perfect opportunity. I jumped at it, and I've been working with the AICPA for over 10 years now. And during the time I was going through and developing content specifically for employee benefit plans, I was given the opportunity to review my first blockchain course. And when I picked up this course, I knew immediately it was my passion. It was so fascinating. I took every opportunity I could to go ahead and find out more about it, read about it, talk to individuals about it. It just was a fascinating aspect of accounting and auditing. And I wound up transferring into my current role, which is emerging assurance technologies. And my core responsibilities ultimately right now are taking this highly technical content, working with these subject matter experts who are really the key to my success, and developing this content that is easy to understand and usable for the profession in this emerging area. And to be able to contribute this way in an emerging area is really fantastic.
Awesome. And I mean, the work that you guys are doing is extremely valuable, because even when I think about people just trying to understand what digital assets are, and then going another level of, okay, how do we account for it, all the valuation of it, you guys are doing a lot of great work. So I'm very interested in, the digital asset working group. How did that kind of come into play, and kind of, what's going on with that group?
Well, in 2018, we formed the Digital Asset Working Group, and it is made up of almost 30 subject matter experts in the blockchain and digital asset space. So lots of great wealth of knowledge. And early on, we decided we were going to go ahead and split it into two subgroups, one that focuses on accounting and one that focuses on auditing. And Matt Shell from Crow chairs the auditing subgroup, the accounting subgroup, sorry. And Amy Steele from Deloitte chairs the auditing subgroup. And the reason why we wound up forming this group is the fact that we were getting questions from members, and they were trying to figure out, they were showing up to clients and they were trying to figure out, how do I account for this digital asset? Or they were showing up to an audit client and saying, they have digital assets on their books. How do I go ahead and audit this? And ultimately, there was a show actually that I watched of yours where you talked to this guest about how if you needed to find information out, you would just find it in a book, go out there, it's in a book somewhere. And this is a unique situation where it wasn't there for the individuals, because the core challenge was that these professionals need to follow standards, and the standards were written prior to digital assets being in existence. So this new asset class comes about, and these professionals are trying to figure out, how do I do my job and do it well and follow the standards? And that's what this group is all about, developing the guidance that is needed for the professionals in this area.
Awesome. I love it because it's the reality of it is you guys are like writing the book or rewriting the book to include these things. And, from a couple of things that I saw on the AICPA website, I mean, last year was a very interesting and busy year for you guys. I mean, we had some guidance come out, I guess, so some non-authoritative guidance that come out. What were some of the things that are next for the group now that you guys have gotten kind of that guidance out? What can people expect to come next for the Digital Asset Working Group?
So ultimately, yes, we did. We published our first version of the practice aid, which includes about 23 question and responses on the accounting side, and the first topic, client acceptance and continuance, on the auditing side. And what's next for us is to go ahead and write more content, because we need to develop additional accounting guidance based on, first we have the foundational questions that we've answered, and now that we're going to get into the more technical areas. And how we do this is we perform outreach, we talk to the working group members, figure out what is the priority next and what we are going to ultimately focus on next. Because in this emerging area, things change so rapidly that in next month, something new can come up. So we're constantly having to reassess and make sure that we develop the content and get it out, include it in the practice aid, and then work on the next batch. And then we'll go ahead and include that in the practice aid. So ultimately, this practice aid will increase in content throughout the years to come.
Gotcha. Now, speaking of the practice aid, so how is it being received by the professionals in audit and the professionals in accounting?
It is being very well received. Ultimately, the digital asset community loves it. They want more information, obviously, and we're trying to develop the content as we go along. And the interesting thing is that when we started out on this journey to develop this non-authoritative guidance, we took a step back and said there was two different paths we could have gone down. We could have gone down the path of, let's get all the questions on accounting and auditing, and let's get the answers and then publish something. And that might have been a couple of years down the line. Instead, the way we worked it was we wound up taking a look at the questions that were coming in, prioritizing them, getting those questions answered to the market as quickly as possible, because speed to market is so important in this emerging area, and then refocusing and reassessing constantly throughout the process, figuring out what the next step is and getting that out to them. So ultimately, trying to get information and more information out to them as quickly as possible.
Now, with this, wealth of a library of information and the practice aids available, where can people get access to it? Where can they find it?
So on our AICPA.org page, we have a dedicated actually page for digital assets. So it's AICPA.org/digital assets. And on there is not only the free resource, the digital asset practice aid that you could download, but there is white papers, there's information on blockchain, there's a webcast that was built off of the practice aid, and it brings to life the practice aid with real life examples. So that's a great resource, as well as a podcast that I participated in that talked about where we were, where we are, and where we're headed. So a whole bunch of great information there.
Awesome. Awesome. So, I mean, I'm curious as, an additional question that I'm not sure if we talked about before, but I'm curious as you've worked with this group, what's been kind of the exciting thing that's driven you as you kind of work with this group and figuring out these new areas?
So the interesting things that I've learned is that there are some unique challenges related to obviously accounting. For example, just characterizing what the digital asset is and what bucket it falls into. And even something as simple as what type of asset is it and where does it fall on the balance sheet, basically. Is it cash? Is it financial instrument? Is it an intangible asset? And trying to work through all of those aspects is really fascinating to me, and working with this wonderful group of members.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, before we wrap up, one of the things that I'm very curious about is, as we have a lot of business owners and there are accounting and finance professionals that view the show, if you were to say, what's two pieces of advice that you would share with them in the area related to digital assets based on the things you've learned and things that you've been exposed to?
So I'd have to say I've learned so much from this working group. They're absolutely passionate group of individuals, and they've taught me so much over the past couple of years. They're all listed in the recognition section in the digital asset practice aid. And ultimately, I have two bits of information and advice. One is on the accounting side and one is on the auditing side. On the accounting side, I would say it is so important before you go ahead and dive into the digital asset space that you understand what type of digital asset you're dealing with, and don't go off of the name that somebody gives it, because terms are thrown around very loosely. And just because they use a term doesn't mean it is the asset that it is. Ultimately, what you need to really do is do your research and make sure that you understand that the form, the substance, and the underlying rights of the asset is what drives what it is, not what somebody is naming it. So that's extremely important. And on the auditing side, client acceptance and continuance is the #1 topic that we have in the practice aid. And it is the most important in my opinion, because before you dive into accepting an engagement that involves digital assets, you really need to take a step back and look at the client acceptance and continuance procedures through the lens of digital assets. There are so many unique aspects, considerations, and challenges that's brought on by these digital assets. For example, auditor skill set. Do you have the skill sets necessary to audit in this space? What about management skill sets? Do they have the skill sets? Or management integrity? Why did they get involved in this digital asset space to begin with? So there's all these unique considerations. And ultimately, I urge you to use a resource such as the practice aid so that you can understand the challenges here and ultimately reduce your risk as an auditor.
Amazing. Now, to give people one more chance to hear, where can they go again to see the practice aid and to see the great work that the Digital Asset Working Group is doing?
It is on AICPA.org/digital assets. And right there, you will have that free resource that you can download.
Awesome. Well, Di, it's been a pleasure having you on. So thank you so much for sharing your background, as well as the great update of what the Digital Asset Working Group is doing at the AICPA.
Thanks so much for having me on your show.
Thanks for tuning in to the Business Talk Library. If you like what you heard and you want to hear more, be sure to click the subscribe button and follow us on all social media platforms as the Business Talk Library.